Welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast, where thoughtful estate planning, mindfulness, and expert guidance converge. I'm your host, Sara Ecklein, a California licensed professional fiduciary, deeply dedicated to guiding families through the intricate journeys of estate planning, trust administration, and end-of-life care. Join me as we explore the essentials of crafting a legacy that truly reflects your values and wishes. From understanding the complexities of estate planning documents to embracing the profound emotional aspects of end-of-life care, I'm here to provide practical advice and compassionate guidance. In each episode, we'll share heartfelt insights from experts in law, finance, and healthcare, as well as personal stories from individuals who have bravely navigated their own legacy of love journeys. Whether you're just beginning to consider your legacy or facing challenging family dynamics that call for clarity and compassion, the Legacy of Love podcast offers invaluable resources and unwavering support. I'm Sara Ecklein, inviting you to join me in exploring how love, thoughtful planning, and compassion and empathy can shape the legacies that we live and leave. Today, we have a truly fascinating guest, Dr. Robert V. Hurst. And he has been an orthodontist and treating patients for more than 50 years. But his insights go far beyond just teeth. Over the course of his career, Dr. Bob has followed his patients through adulthood, studying how their birth order shapes their lives. So through his research, he's discovered what he calls double birth orders. Really, this is a groundbreaking concept that offers a deeper understanding of our human behavior. So Dr. Bob believes that by understanding birth order, we can tune into the unconscious behaviors and scripts embedded in our family systems. So it almost functions like an invisible fingerprint that shapes our interactions and decisions throughout life. In today's episode, we discuss my own family system. I'm the oldest. I have a younger sister, 4.5 years younger than me. And I have to say, it's pretty incredible. There was just so much accuracy. It resonated a lot with how birth order plays out in my own personal life. Where I was really interested in hearing from Dr. Bob is over the course of years serving hundreds of families and administering trusts and estates, I can really see how birth order can play out. And I think that this tool and this knowledge can be so valuable in helping us navigate complex family dynamics. And ultimately, it can allow us to have better understanding and ultimately deeper compassion for those that we serve. So I encourage you to pick up a copy of his book, Life Fingerprint: How Birth Order Affects Your Path Throughout Your Life. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And today we'll explore his discoveries and how understanding birth order can transform the way we connect with ourselves and those around us. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Dr. Robert V. Hurst, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with us.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. Really, I've actually done some research about birth order since knowing that you were going to come. So anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing what we get to talk about, and I can hopefully pick your brain just even about my family system. But before we get into that, I would love for listeners to hear kind of why birth order, what brings you to this work?
Well, it all started, I'm an orthodontist, and it started when I had to make decisions fairly quickly with my patients. When I would see them for their first visit, I knew if they were going to become my patient, I had to get their cooperation, and I'd be seeing them for many years. Even after the braces come off, you've probably heard of retainers that people wear after the braces are removed. So I'm going to be seeing these people for a long time. So I found out early that all children from the same families were not alike. And they didn't want to be alike either. And so they had different characteristics. And I thought, if I could understand these characteristics, maybe I could get better cooperation. I'm dealing with teenagers, and try to get cooperation from a teenager I mean, that's all I see is teenagers. It's like being a teacher for seventh and eighth grade. Okay, it's tough.
Yeah,
So,
that's a hard age.
yeah, I looked into several things, and one was I looked into the idea of birth order, and I saw that different birth orders had different groups of characteristics. Now, you develop these characteristics by your interaction with your siblings when you're growing up, except for the only child. That person interacts with the parents because they don't have other siblings. But at any rate, I studied it, I learned about it, and I started to apply it in my practice because I'd see the patient, I'd see the parent, I'd kind of make a decision on how I wanted to go ahead. And I found that about a third of the time it worked, but two-thirds of the time it didn't work. And I was about to throw out the whole concept when I decided to go back and look at each individual family. And what I found out was two-thirds of my patients had brothers and sisters that were 4 or more years separated from them. And then I realized these kids had double birth orders. So I wasn't dealing with a one, I was dealing with a one only because that child lived 4 or 5 years by themselves as an only child with the parents, and then they had another sibling and they became the firstborn, but really they had a lot of the only characteristics. So when I applied that to my patients, it was the Rosetta Stone of understanding the whole concept of birth order. This concept that I have worked out will unmask everybody in your life. It's the solution. It answers all the questions. And that's why many of these things you read about birth order and they say, this just doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work if you just think of single birth orders. But once you add the double birth order, it works for everybody.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that background. And that very much kind of resonates with me and the work that I do. A lot of times I'm coming into kind of contentious family situations when I'm administering a trust or estate. So finding tools that kind of help quickly understand like the entire family system, like that is just so helpful. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is I think that this birth order, the double birth order will be interesting to kind of just touch upon my family system. So I'm the first and I'm 4.5 years older than my sister. So let's just use us as an example. What would that, having more meaning about me? I'm going to sit in the family more like an only child,
Okay. Were you 4 years difference in school?
more like five.
Okay. All right.
Um,
When the minimum is four, when you're 4 years apart in school, you don't share the same friends. I mean, it's too big a difference, between
yeah.
an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 16 year, they're just too far.
The only
So,
time we went to the same school, she was in kindergarten, I was in fifth grade. Other than that,
right,
we were always,
right.
going to different schools.
So you're a 50-50 an only child and 50% a firstborn. If you were 10 years apart, you would be 90% an only child and 10% a firstborn. You'll be more of an only than a one. But at
That
four
makes
years,
sense.
it's 50-50. Now, let me give you some examples of some one onlys that you might know. Lucille Ball. She
Yeah.
was a one only birth order. Okay, and you saw what she did with her life. I mean, you're very strong. And you have a lot of self-confidence. That's the only child comes with a lot of self-confidence. Oprah is a one only. Do you remember who Dr. Laura was? She just recently was deceased, but she was a one only. Our President Obama was a one only, and you'll like this one. How about Judge Judy?
Really?
She's a one only also. So, you've come from, a nice group. What I've always found is that people with double birth orders make a splash in this world. It's that extra power you get from the only child. It just makes all your characteristics so much stronger. And a one is likes to be in charge and whatever, but a one only is really in charge. But now, if we take a look at your younger sibling, is that a sister?
Yes.
Okay. She is a two only. She's sometimes referred to as a princess. What does your sister do?
Well, she's more of a free spirit where I went more of a traditional path. She's like you
Oh,
you can't tell her what to
you
do.
can't tell
She
her
did,
what to do.
yeah, you
That
can't
is
tell
the
her what to
key
do.
word. And actually, we have T-shirts that go with ones and twos, and the T-shirt for the two is "Don't tell me what to do." You find them on our website. But
That's
just
funny.
give you an example of a couple of two onlys. Britney Spears is a two only.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you remember all her problems she had with her conservatorship, and I wrote a
Yeah.
blog and I said she's going to win this because you don't tell a two only what to
What
do.
to do. Yeah.
Barbara Streisand is a two only,
Interesting.
and Ellen DeGeneres is a two only. Okay, so two onlys are very, very strong. They also have a very high pain threshold. I mean, physical pain. We find that true in orthodontics. This sometimes it's a little uncomfortable when we move teeth and things. Not to a two only. They feel nothing. It could be a little tiny, petite little girl. She breaks everything and she says, I don't know how I did that. That's because they have a very high pain threshold, but you don't tell them what to do. And you only have one time to make a good first impression with a number two. They don't give you any leeway. So you guys
That's
are
funny.
very, very different, as you're supposed to be. You know, all birth orders are different. Every family member has their own job to do in the family. And that's what's important in your trust work. If you know the birth order of all these kids in the family, you'll know how they're interacting and you know who's the one you want to deal with and who's the one that's going to give you trouble.
Well, I
Okay?
think that that's where the work that you do and just speaking to birth order, resonated for me because serving, hundreds of families over the years, you do begin to see themes and, like only children, also like the firstborn. A lot of times that's the one that I'm interfacing with. They're kind of more of the speaker for the family for all the beneficiaries. Not always, but it doesn't really surprise me. That's kind of what I expect, and also being saddled also when we're looking at aging parents, a lot of times it's the firstborn that's really carrying a lot of that, emotional and actual the physical labor of supporting the aging parents. So I see that as well in my practice.
Yes, but that can shift, and I'll tell you how they can shift. The thing called sibling rivalry. If you have two children less than the 4 years, see, at 4 years, you're too far apart to really be rivals. You're really your own people. But if it's a year or two apart, number two always wants to knock off number one, dethrone them. And when that happens, number ones, and you'll see this in your practice, number one can drop out. They don't know how to fight back, and it's not good. But they do drop out, and number two now gets the number one position. But with that comes more responsibility. So if you see
Mm.
your number twos are taking charge of the family, it's because number one got dethroned by number two. Now, a lot of it has to do with the sex of the participants. Are they two girls, two boys, or is it a boy girl, girl boy? You have to look at all that, and these are, you're looking at the family structure and you're adding the birth order characteristics to these people. So you can really see how this is so dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see like as you increase the number of children, between the age gaps and then like you're saying between boys and girls or men and women, all of this is going to add different color and flavor to each family system.
I'll just touch on there's two types of double birth orders. The type that you are, where it's an only child because there's a 4 year gap. But sometimes in families, there's a gap of 4 years between groups of children. For instance, the first two are close, then there's a 4 year gap, and maybe there's two more. An example of that would be Princess Di. She
Mm.
was the third born, but she was the oldest in the second family. So it's another type of double birth order. Was a 3-1 or a 1-3. Doesn't make any difference. And as that one in her life, she wanted to be in charge. But as the three characteristics, remember, she was very much involved with mines that were left behind in war areas. And, she was very helpful to, and of course, she was a kindergarten teacher too. But so, number threes, they kind of want to save the world. They see things very differently than one and two. But when you combine the two together, you get a more complicated person. So she was a 3-1 double birth order. So that's the other type. And of course, her younger brother would be a 4-2. So it takes those two characteristics. And remember, after she died, he was very upset with the royal family. He said, you didn't treat her right and whatever. He was very outspoken. So that's the other type of double birth order when you have two ordinal numbers together. Not quite as strong as you and your sister with the only, but that's what, you don't want to get into the weeds on this, but it does make a difference. And that's why, if you get into this, you're going to understand everybody in your life. It's
Oh,
fascinating.
that is.
It makes life so easy.
Well, everything that you shared about, even just with me and my sister as that example, it resonates. I mean, I think very much so with
Yeah.
both for both of us.
Now, we don't want to get into your married life or whatever, but you can find the correct sibling too that matches you. Now, there's two types of love at first sight. One is if you find someone with your exact same birth order. If you found
I
another,
found that.
is he a one only?
Well, he's not a one only, but he's the firstborn. He only has a 2-year age gap with his brother, but
Okay. All right. Are there any girls in his family?
no,
Okay. So here's the situation. He is a one, and I'm assuming he didn't get dethroned by his younger brother,
not
and
yet.
and you are a one only. So at times you are the same, you're ones, but other times you're an only, and I'm sorry for him, but you rule the roost. When you're an only, he's number two. I mean, there's no way around that. But so if you find someone with your same birth order, and he's pretty close, he's a one, not a one only, but a one. I say the problem here is that's one type of love at first sight. And the reason why having someone with your same birth order is a little more difficult is because when you look in the mirror only shows one image. So, there's only room for one. So if you both have the same birth order, somebody needs to step back and take a different role. But in your case, you're a one only. So you determine who's going to step back. I mean, there's no choice there. But now, here is the sticker in this is that he had no sisters. You had no brothers. So another type of love at first sight, and the kind that I found they never seem to get divorced, is if you find someone in your family that represents the exact person in your family with the exact gender. Like if your sister was a two only boy and you
Hmm.
married a two only boy that had a one only sister, it's perfect.
I see. So there's that like familiarity. It's
Right.
similar.
You
Yeah.
understand that birth order and you understand that gender. So for you and for this person, it's everything's so simple because you understand everything. You understand him, he understands you. In a case where you don't have the other gender in your family, he sees you and you see him as the gender that was in your family. He sees you more like a boy, you see him more like a girl. You understand it, but it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So
Interesting.
yeah, so I'm just telling you this because you're dealing with families. There might be spouses involved in these trusts that are influencing their spouse, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. I think the family dynamics makes the work that I do a very interesting and very
Yes.
rewarding and meaningful. And it also adds just like a layer of complexity. And of course, it's always nice kind of going in. My preference is to work with people that want to work with me, but sometimes that's not always the situation. So the more that I can kind of I think come in with better understanding and compassion, the better that I'm able to serve.
Well, let me tell you an easy way that you can work this because you have to find out their birth orders and you're talking to them. And you don't want to break any laws. And this is how you do it. You say, you're talking to whoever you're talking to, you say, oh, do you have any brothers or sisters? And they'll say, oh, and they'll list them, so write them down. And you say, well, are you the oldest? And they'll tell you, oh, yeah, Mary and Ellen and Jim and John. Okay, okay. And then you say, was there ever any gaps of 4 years between any of them? And they say, oh, yeah, there was a gap just between me and my next one, but all the others were the same. And then immediately you know everybody's birth order. You know all the double birth orders without asking any other questions. And then you know. So if your next case that comes up, you can send me the information and I'll tell you all about these people and who to be
Let's take
careful
the
of and who's going to
generous.
help you. And of course, you're
So,
going to get along best with the one onlys.
right. Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that seems to be true. The ones that were more same, like there's usually less friction. I guess that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because, a lot of times, at least the work that I do, a lot of times I'm there for a reason. They need a neutral party. So the types of families that I serve, a lot of times there's divorce and remarriage. There's also, I actually have a lot of beneficiaries I work with where they were adopted. So I would be curious to kind of hear your way in, like, how does birth order come into play for like a family where there's been a divorce and then remarried and a blended family? And then also later, I would love to hear about kind of adopted children.
Okay, those are questions I get all the time
Yeah.
because those things are happening all the time. And I see that in my practice because I deal with, blended families. What
Yeah.
happens is when you, and I'll give you a story in a minute, but when you put them together, if the birth order, if they move up in birth order in the family, they adjust perfectly. If they get demoted in birth order in the family, they don't adjust well at all.
Oh, interesting.
I'll give you an example. I had a little girl she was an only child, and her mom decided to get remarried. And it just happened that the guy that she remarried, his girls were being treated in my practice also. So she ended up getting two sisters. So when they decided to get married, she was so excited about this. She was going to get a dad, and but she told her mom, "Look, we don't want to sell our house yet." And I said, "Okay." Now the only child, they deal with the parents almost on the same level. They don't deal with them as children. They deal with them as adults. So she got married. They moved into his house, and now she had two older sisters. So she went from being an only child to being a number three. She
Oh,
got demoted. Within 6 months, oh, and she was a very cooperative patient. Right after the marriage, she was totally uncooperative. There was all kinds of problems. She became sullen. She was a bright,
oh,
happy little girl. Not anymore. Within 6 months, they got divorced. She moved back to her own room. She was sharing a room with these girls too. She moved back to her own
oh,
house in her own room. So there's an example of putting a blend together and get demoted. See, it didn't affect her two stepsisters because they were both older than her. So they were a one and a two. Nothing changed with them. But she became a three from being an only. And she couldn't handle it. And she decided to end her mom's marriage. And she did. And they went back together. Okay, so that's that. Now, adopted children. Adopted children makes no difference. Once they come into the family, whatever their age is, they get that birth order. So it doesn't make any difference. Let's say you had two children, two natural children, and they adopted one. That adopted child becomes a number three
mm,
because it's younger than the
mm.
other two. Okay. Where you would get into a problem is if you ended up having two children and you adopted a child that was older than your two children.
Oh,
That doesn't
interesting.
necessarily happen, but it could happen. Then your two natural children get demoted. They're not going to like this adopted child at all.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. Have
Oh
you seen
yeah.
this in your practice? I'm
I
just
haven't
curious.
seen that. I've seen the other one, but I've seen a lot of times when, well, why don't we start talking about twins?
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've all the questions. When you bring something up, it brings something else to mind.
Yeah.
And twins will adopt a birth order, even if actually one twin is older than the other. Whatever they're told, you're the older twin, they will become that older twin, that number. Okay, it
Even if
doesn't
it's a
matter.
minute or a
Even
few
if
seconds.
yeah, even if they were the second, and they they say, well, I'm the older twin, but I could look at their teeth, and even if they're identical, I can tell which teeth are getting loose and falling out before the others, so I know which one might be 2 or 3 minutes older, but as they get older, the differences get greater. So I can see that this number one twin really was number two. But when they come out and say, "Oh, that was the number one twin, that's the number two," and so they take on these characteristics. So it's the family thing, okay?
That's so
And
interesting.
yeah, yeah. I had one set of twins where the parents refused to let them know who was older, and they had a lot of psychiatric problems. Still do to this day. Everybody wants to know who they are. They never
Mm,
allowed these kids to know. So sometimes one kid would be number one and one kid would be number two, and they'd switch back and forth. They had their own language. That happens a lot with twins, but these
yeah.
kids really had their own language. And as adults, I follow my patients a long time. They're still having problems. And the parents, I said, why didn't you let them know who was older? And their answer was, we didn't want any competition between them. Well, that's what
Mm.
you really want, is a little bit of competition, because it gave them an identity, but it made them with no identity. They didn't know who they were.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yes.
Right?
So, it's environmental, a lot of it. So you might be running into twins in your business. I don't know. I'm sure you will eventually.
Yeah, and personally, I actually know a good amount of twins, and
Oh, okay.
when I was young, I nannied throughout college, and I nannied for two twin boys.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So now you're thinking which one
yeah.
was one and which one was two.
Oh, I already know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it immediately came to mind. So what you were saying kind of resonates. There was the one that was very much, the older of the two. And it's funny, actually, even at age 3, they knew who came
Which
out
one,
first.
which one were you dating?
Yeah, they were sweet. Yeah, sweet boys. Okay. Well, this really helps. I'm really curious. What is the research, or how did birth order kind of come to be?
Well, it started with a fellow by the name of Alfred Adler, and he worked with Freud, and they were in the same psychoanalytic society. And Freud felt that the personality was based on your relationship with your parents. And Adler said, I think your personality is really related to your interaction with your siblings. And they did not see eye to eye. Now, it was kind of interesting because Freud was the oldest in his father's second family, and Adler was number two in his family. So they weren't going to get along anyway. And so Alfred Adler was the one who really started the whole concept of birth order. And he came to the United States just like Freud did, during the 30s or so. He died in the 30s, but Alfred Adler was the father of the birth order theory. So that's where it
Oh,
all
interesting.
began. Yeah. So it does go back some way. And if you think about it, they were in Europe, they were in England, and kings, kings and queens and castles, and the firstborn inherited the castle. That's where the idea came. Firstborn, primogeniture, it's called. And sometimes he had to be, number two had to seek his own fortune. He had to leave. Or he might kill the king and take over the throne. So that's really the real touchstone with birth order. was the royal families. You know, like today, it was when the two boys were born, number two was called the spare, the heir and the spare. And you see what's kind of happening today with Harry, the spare, number two, didn't want to be told what to do. He turned his back on the whole thing. He left. So there you see it. Everybody sees the royal family. That's birth order in action. But I hate to tell you, he married a double birth order. He married a three only. Megan is a three only. Now, remember I said earlier, his mother was a three.
Oh,
Diana was a 3-1, but Megan was a three only. So he saw something in Megan that he liked, but he didn't get his mother. He got a three only, which is the real drama queen. And I think she's kind of drama. And you saw what she did. She almost, took apart the royal family. Three onlys are very strong that way. And they're very different because an only child has certain characteristics and a three has characteristics. But when you put them together, you take the three and you give that three all this power. There's power, intuitive power to understand people and to manipulate people. That's what a three only can do.
oh, interesting.
And she certainly has manipulated him and tried to
Wow.
manipulate the royal family. So it's all out there. It's interesting.
That
See what
is, I
happens
mean,
when you bring something up?
right? It opens up the door to so much more.
Right.
So I'm curious also, just, as a parent, I think, the example that you talked about before with the parents of twins, where they were like, oh, we don't want to let, the twins know who was first in line. We want them to kind of be, on equal footing, but kind of by doing that, it never allowed their children to just kind of have this sense of knowing and belonging and identity.
Yeah, no identity. Right.
So I think for the parents out there listening, and I'm one of them. I have right now just one daughter. What is it that we can do? Is it just really by honoring where they're at in the birth order, or any advice there?
Well, for children, all the children want to be different. So you don't want to make all your children alike. You want to go with their what their talents are. For instance, if you have two boys, a one and a two, don't have both of those boys playing football. One of them can play football, but the other one should play baseball. You want some competitiveness, but you don't want it so much that one has to win over the other. So you want the children to be different. Like number three is going to be your sweetheart in the family. They're going to see they see life. They're artists. They're music. They're intuitive, and they watch number one and number two try to kill each other, and they instigate it, but they watch it from a distance. And so, but it's a very special child. I'll give you a story about that in a minute. But then number four is that's the true baby in the family. And that's the one that, oh, we don't want to have the baby come with us. So they become loud sometimes. They hit each other, hit the other siblings because they're the baby and no one listens to them. But then number five comes along, and number five is like a number one, but the second order number one. I call it like primary colors and secondary colors. The number five is like a one, but smoother, a little less edge on them. And number six is like a two. Don't tell me what to do, but a little nicer, a little smoother. Okay, so that's what happens when you get even bigger families. But an example I'll give you about a three. I had a family that the father he had dreams to become a professional football player, but he never made it. And he had two girls, treated the girls, then he had a boy, was treating the boy. He finally had that boy. He was going to make this boy the professional football player. Well, he really did not have any interest in becoming a professional football player, but he wanted to, he wanted his dad to be, to do what he wanted. His dad wanted to be a football player. So he played football when he was, a little guy in a junior high and college, but he never was that quarterback that his dad wanted him to be. In fact, he spent a lot of time on the bench. What did he do on the bench? On the bench, he was drawing pictures of the other athletes on the team. He was an artist. And time went on, and I followed my patients for years. He ended up in New York as a graphic artist, very, very successful. Not a professional football player, but he was a disappointment to his father. But his father wanted to make him something he didn't want to be. And that's what I tell parents. I say, you know, each of your children is different. Don't try to make them all the same. Let them blossom into what they want to do. Now, in your case, you have an only child. How old is your only child?
Oh, she's a year and a half.
Okay. Well, she may become a one only like you, or she may just become a one. But, as a one, as your first child, of course, I mean, take a look at the family album. She has got lots of pictures in there already, right?
Oh, yeah.
People say, well, give me some examples of a birth order. I said, look at your family album. Number one has all the pictures. Number two has less. Number three, less. And number four is lucky to have a picture at all. We do a thing in the office every so many years. We put out our baby pictures. Okay. And, well, one of the girls in the office says, Dr. Hurst, they're going to know who you are. And I said, how can that be? These are all baby pictures. He says, yours is the only one that's in black and white. And I said, okay. And the number four, she was lucky to find a picture at all. And what we found was one that was like eaten dog-eared by the dog got it. So we had her picture up there, for number four.
Oh.
But, a couple other things people want to think about birth order and does it exist? Think about Thanksgiving dinner. When you go back at home and have Thanksgiving dinner, everybody is back where they were as kids. If you were sitting at the little kid table, you're going to be sitting at the little kid table again, even though you're an investment banker. If you were number three or four, you're at that table. Okay. So, family reunions, when you get back together, everybody takes their place. Remember, everybody in the family has a role to play.
Oh,
Okay.
I believe that. I mean, I know that, from my own Thanksgiving dinner tables, and I also, I see that, especially kind of after death, once the matriarch and patriarch of the family have passed, and you can just see the, who comes, who doesn't, who's loud, who's quiet and sitting back. I mean, you see this come out.
And
Yeah.
it just doesn't change. I mean, you're not old enough to go to your 25-year high school reunion, but when you do,
Not yet. Soon. Soon
you
enough.
will find that everybody is the same.
Yeah.
They didn't change, you know. So once the imprint is there, that's where it is. It stays that way, and that's why birth order. It's the unconscious thing that's going on behind you. It's like radio waves. I still don't know where they come from, or television waves. Where do they come from? But somehow you receive them on your TV. But it's there and it's running behind the scenes. If everybody would start to understand this, they'd understand all these things and you wouldn't be surprised by things in life. You would expect certain things from certain people.
I
It
love
just
that.
makes your life so easy.
Right. I've brought Catherine Revoir on, and she does family constellation works. But what she brings also to the work that has always kind of stayed with me is she always says this of courseness. There's this of courseness to life when we have deeper understanding, of ourselves and, also our family system. Like, of course, that would be your reaction once we kind of have that context. So, anyways,
Sure.
that this work kind of brings that of courseness to mind, like of course you would feel that way, or of course that would be kind of a reaction if knowing kind of again where you fall in the family system.
Yes, and when you're dealing with your clients, let's say an example is the person that you're dealing with is the number three. Okay, with the trust things. Well, number three is very intuitive, but they also, we say, laughing on the outside, crying on the inside. They won't let
Mm.
you in to see what they're really feeling because they're so delicate. Example of this is Rosie O'Donnell. She's a three, but she seems tough as nails. But she's
Mm.
not tough. She's tough. That's just an outer coating to protect herself. So when you're dealing with different people, you'll understand why they're approaching you the way they are, because they're hiding their real self. Okay. And now
Mm.
when you deal with your number two, you think about, well, I'm dealing with my sister, you'll understand that one. And you say, well, this one, they don't want to be told what to do, but they're listening to me, but they're going to go their own way. Okay. And so knowing, because you're going to be dealing with each and every one of the people in the family.
Oh, yeah.
And so you might end up dealing with number five because number one is now deceased.
Yes, that actually was a question that came to mind. I work with people typically much later in life than you. I'm
Sure.
not most of the time working with seventh or eighth graders, but even just thinking about my own family system, like my grandfather lost his brother at a very young age. I think his brother was only 2 or 3. And so with that kind of family system, does the younger child move up in birth order, or do they kind of still stay in that, the regular birth order?
It depends on when it happened. When it happened
Mm.
so young, he immediately moves up to that birth order. Instead of being a two, he became a one, except if we call it a phantom child. If you keep that child alive that died,
Mm.
then this child that took his place has a difficult role because that child that died is now the perfect child.
Mm.
Because every year they celebrate his birthday and whatever, and no,
Mm.
this child, number two child, can never compete with him. But if they
Mm.
let that
Mhm.
phantom child, he died, we buried him, he's dead, and now number two becomes number one. It happened to Van Gogh. Van Gogh had an older brother who died, I want to say it was almost a year before Van Gogh was born. His mother never let that child die. So
Mm.
Van Gogh always had this older brother that was perfect. Van Gogh had mental issues.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
He cut off his ear. He was.
Yeah, I think for my grandfather that was true too. The phantom.
Did they keep that child alive?
Yeah, unfortunately. And it was
Oh.
a traumatic, he was hit by a car at like a 2 or 3 year old playing in the street.
Were there any other children besides your grandfather?
Yes. Yeah, but my grandfather's the oldest.
So he was affected by this more than anybody. So
Yeah.
he became a one, but he never could become a one because of his brother, because they kept him alive,
Yeah.
in their mind, in the family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was a two, but he had to take the role of a one. Now in your profession, when you have older families and somebody's deceased, everybody they keep their birth order, but they move up in what they have to do. If number one died, then number two moves up to do the role of number one, even though they're number two. Number three moves up to number two to do that role, but they still keep the characteristics of number three.
So it's more in terms of like their duties would change or
Yes,
expectation and obligation, but not their identity.
yes,
Right.
because in a family, everybody had a role. You as number one, you're the mama, you're in charge. Okay,
Hmm.
where if you were gone, then your sister would have to do your job, but it's not who she is. So it's more difficult for her to do your job because that's not her job. She
Hmm.
never did that job. Okay. And you'll see that with older families when you start to pick them up like this, and they're having to do this trust work with you, and they're not set up to do it because they weren't programmed to do it, but they're trying to do it, and it's hard for them. So if you know that that's what happened, you'll have more empathy for what they're going through.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can see it. It fits every part of your life. Every part of your life.
yeah. Yes. Well, I'm curious. Do you work with people one on one, or is it more of you provide books and resources to families? Because I'm like, this is just you're just a wealth of information.
We do both. We have a website, mybirthorder.com, where we have our book. We have a soft cover that was a first edition. This second edition is hardcover and it's in color. And in the back of it is a question and answer thing from my lectures, all the questions people ask me. Okay, we also have it as a a USB, you put this in your computer,
Oh,
and
yes.
and it has all the pictures on it and the whole business. Okay, so
Oh,
it's live
very cool.
fingerprint.
We'll
Okay,
include all of this in the show notes. So,
yeah, we do workshops, we do one-on-one, but we do companies sometimes. I'll give you a funny story. It was a towing company I was working with, and the secretary called me. She said, I was in Miami with my boss, and we were waiting for our plane, and we were having lunch, and he had a Dr. Pepper, and I'd never had a Dr. Pepper. So I said to him, "Could I have a sip of your Dr. Pepper?" And he said, "No." He says, "I'm an only child, and I don't share." She said, "I couldn't believe it. He's my boss." I said, "No, it's birth order." So, we were doing birth order to try to get the right people in the right jobs. So you don't have to be searching around and waiting for people to fail to find the right job for them. So,
wow.
I mean, there's lots of stories.
Well, I love that. Dr. Bob, thank you so much for being on the Legacy of Love podcast. I've taken away so much from this talk, so I know listeners will too. We'll link all the ways to get in touch with you, follow you, get your work in the show notes. Anything that you would like to leave listeners with?
Well, I would say life is not difficult if you understand the people you're working with. And you can understand the expectations of the different people, and then you're never disappointed. When my number 4 kid drops their appointment slip on the way out of the office, I know that one of the other kids is going to pick it up and help them. So if you can understand birth order and have it be part of your life is going to be so much simpler, and
Mm.
you won't be under stress.
Oh, I love that. Thank you again. Have a
Okay,
beautiful rest of your day, Dr. Bob.
thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy of Love podcast. Please listen, subscribe, and share the show with someone you think would find it valuable. Let's stay connected. You can find me on LinkedIn, and if you're interested in professional fiduciary services, you can learn more by visiting our website at trustandhonor.co. Disclaimer: by accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that Sara Ecklein makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information provided in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Sara Ecklein does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. The third-party materials or contents of any third-party site referenced in this podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Sara Ecklein or Trust and Honor, and we assume no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in the third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and or links referenced. Sara Ecklein makes no warranty that this podcast or the servers that make it available are free of viruses, worms, or other elements or codes that manifest contaminating or destructive properties.